here we are, Talbot Street.
Everybody's come through the doors of this building, haven't they? And all sorts of things.
Yeah, they've come through for complaints, confessions to murder, and of course Jerry Hutch snuck in this building as well late at night one night and did an interview.
And flowers.
And flowers.
Don't forget the flowers, because we're going to tell all these stories at the Cork Podcast Festival, which is our show's actually on the 30th of March in the Opera House. Tickets are on sale from the corkpodcastfestival.ie, and they're selling fast. We've only got, 2 weeks left?
2 weeks left, yeah.
Do you feel kind of bad talking about a 74-year-old woman on Crime World?
Well, I might feel a bit bad, but at least I never doorstepped her.
I did, didn't I?
She's one of your original ops. I mean, don't update our language, by the way, ops.
Yeah, what's that?
Well, I think it means opposition, but that's what the kids say. The kids say, like,
I thought you were
that gang is ops with the other gang.
Your operation, like if I had some sort of a surveillance operation on a pensioner.
That's what they say. The kids they say, "Oh
ops.
they're my ops there."
Yeah, so Winnie Lawrence was my op.
Probably. Yeah.
No, I did. I remember. Yeah, the doorstepping of her and just not feeling very good about it afterwards. And she was quite polite in her own way.
Well, I mean, I suppose so. I mean, the reason we're obviously talking about Winnie Lawrence again is because her son, her daughter-in-law, and her two grandsons have all been convicted in relation to, I suppose, a series of fraudulent claims, basically a compo claim scam.
Which was described as a family business when they were first began to be investigated by the Gardaí and the insurance companies.
Yeah.
They basically described it as that was their sort of business.
And that's what it came back to. It was described as a multi-generational fraudulent operation. So, I mean, people feel different ways about these things, I suppose. Certainly, whenever we put up stories about compo claim fraud, there's a huge amount of interest in it. Some people find it very, very frustrating, and I suppose as a sort of symptom of modern society. But others think, well, whatever, take what you can. But
because they tend to be suing councils and they tend to be suing,
Yeah, but I mean, a lot of the people that suffer as a result of fraudulent compo claims are small businesses.
Of course, their insurances go sky high and they can't continue to operate.
Exactly, and ultimately those things get put back on the consumer. But yeah, it was an interesting case. I mean, I don't think I've ever heard that multi-generational fraudulent claims like that.
Now, Winnie Lawrence is the mother of Patrick Lawrence, who's 53, and the mother-in-law of Eileen Lawrence. And she has really been described as the glue that holds the family together, hasn't she?
She has.
The two grandsons, who are now in their 20s, were children when they were, basically committing these crimes of fraudulently claiming money. So there was a whole flurry of trips and falls and skids, and Winnie Lawrence herself fell off a bus, fell over a pavement, she fell in a shop. She was very unfortunate. She burnt herself at one point.
Did she fall on a lettuce leaf, I think, in a supermarket?
Iceland.
In Iceland, was it? Yeah.
So she was basically doing that, but the others were also sort of tripping and falling quite regularly. But they were trying to make the claims under false identities, which was where really they were caught out, because they had made a certain amount of claims in their own names, and then they were taking on these separate identities. Like Winnie Lawrence made a personal injury claim using the false name Margaret Mongan.
Yeah, see, so obviously, if you take a civil action, if you sue somebody for compensation, it's not a criminal matter. Doesn't go into the criminal courts. If you win your case, you take the money and the other person pays your costs. And if you lose, you're at risk of owing money. So normally there's no criminal endeavour either way. There's no risk for criminal prosecution, and there's no, nobody can be put in prison or anything. But obviously what pushed these claims into a different matter was the use of the paperwork, effectively. So if you sign an affidavit, if you go to a solicitor, you give all your information, you attend doctors, all of those matters, you commit things to paper. Mm-hmm. Then you have to go into a civil court and you have to basically swear that these things are true. And if they're not true, this is then that becomes a possible criminal offence. And in part, this is what the Gardaí investigated. So they've been done for a charge of deception, which is not uncommon, but a relatively, relatively unusual charge. Maybe that's not fair, but not a common charge of fraud, effectively. So it's not really a determination necessarily on some of the claims themselves, but it's a determination on the paperwork around it. I mean, the last really high-profile case involving deception was the famous Carlow post office case, where those guys were done for attempted deception, where they fraudulently, according to the state, attempted to get the pension of a guy who was
dead. Dead man between them
yes.
into the post office to collect his pension, but he wasn't breathing.
Yeah.
So quite a clear case of deception with them.
Yeah.
The reason we're back talking about Winnie Lawrence, of course, is because she was condemned to prison at her age of 74.
Yeah.
And she was given 3 years, I think 18 months suspended.
Yeah.
And with the remission, she should have been still in prison until November, but she has been freed. And this is because she's kind of got lucky.
Yeah.
Because the Dochas Centre, the female prison, is overcrowded. And obviously Winnie Lawrence is somebody who probably is seen as a low-risk offender, reoffender. Everyone knows her face now.
Yeah.
And she's kind of, I'd say, come to the end of the line with those insurance claims. Certainly they would be challenged, no doubt, if she tried to take any more. She's also probably not a violent individual or a risk to anybody. So she'd be one of those identified by the prison service as being, you got to open the doors and let some out if it's overcrowded. What's going on in the Dochas? Because I don't believe that has expanded, has it, since it was opened initially?
I know they've upgraded it. I'm not sure if they've expanded beds. But absolutely, I mean, people that come in for these types of offences across the prison system are serving, often hours, days of months-long sentences. I mean, people are literally being booked in and released straight away on temporary release, I suppose, in theory. But in practice, a lot of these charges that are non-violent, people just simply aren't serving any time. There's a huge amount of overcrowding, particularly in certain areas in the male prisons, but also on remand prisons and even in juvenile detention centres as well. The Dochas, and there's effectively two women's prisons in Ireland, one in the Dochas, which is attached to the Mountjoy complex, although it's run separately, and in Limerick's women's prison as well. The Dochas would be certainly a far more modern
facility. Like it's, I remember going into it with John Lonergan when it first opened, and it was so modern at the time. It was little rooms with a single bed in them. Yeah, they'd have a desk and a chair and that, and an ensuite bathroom. Yeah, it felt so wow compared to what had been there. And
there's also kind of as you go through the system, there's these kind of houses effectively. That are, where people have, they share a living room and a couple of bedrooms, but they're not really on a wing as such. So
I remember speaking to him at the time about it, the kind of prisoners that they were, there's a handful of female killers, murderers, women who commit, really serious crime, and they wouldn't be somebody who would be given early release because of overcrowding. But there was also a lot of concern around women who were in and out of the prison system because of addiction, really. Yeah. And, because drug-related crime and all the rest of it. But a lot of them were kind of coming in pregnant. Yeah. And they were having their babies and the baby wasn't spending any time with them. But the Dochas Centre provided a facility that the children could stay with them within the prison for a period of time, for the first 10 months or something it was of their lives. And that was just a much more humane way to handle it for the child, of course, who needs that bond with the mother. And there was also an attempt at that point to give them a trade that they could maybe use in the outside world. In the women's prison, they did a lot of courses in hairdressing and makeup and this kind of thing in the hopes that they could get out. And they said that it was so well run, the Dochas, that like for healthcare issues, that the women were never healthier probably in their adult lives than when they were in the prison, because they were, getting, off drugs and they were getting just better in general. But the problem is our population has risen greatly. Yeah. And have our prisons reacted to that? Like 6 months ago, figures released, and of course the prison officers are always giving out about overcrowding, showed that there was a 60% increase in the number of prisoners being granted temporary release. Rules had changed, and it was really because of that overcrowding crisis. At that point, the population, they were talking about, the prison population regularly exceeds 5,000, which is over 100% of the capacity.
Yeah, and exactly. I mean, we do have population pressures. We have a relatively young population as well, where obviously the majority of crimes are committed by, young men, I suppose, in their sort of early 20s, effectively. So we have a high proportion of people in that age bracket. We also have large numbers of people, immigrants coming into the country as well, that have increased the population. And then also we have the general sentencing pressure, where there is in society a belief that people should maybe receive prison sentences for certain offences. That can be reflected in political moves that are made. I know it's a long time ago now, but for example, in relation to drugs, where we've introduced mandatory sentencing. So it's a very complicated issue. The problem with just lumping a load of people into prisons are that any focus on rehabilitation becomes less, and really what starts to happen is that the prison system have to focus on managing the people that they have in there, reducing risk, and they have less and less resources to go towards the rehabilitation, which everybody ultimately believes is a good idea.
So what do you do with somebody like Winnie Lawrence then? I mean, there has been a huge amount of investment into the investigation of this family crime gang, as they were described as, with the business being fraudulent, making fraudulent claims and collecting a lot of money. Like, what do you do with somebody like that, a 74-year-old woman who is continuing to offend in that nature, is obviously not suitable for an overcrowded prison, in that she's going to be one of the first to be let out, because she's not really a risk to society in general. How do you sort of proportion all that? I mean, the cost of putting her case alone, let's just take her on her own, through the courts, the investigation, all the paperwork that would have gone with that, the files to the DPP, the days in court, and then the placing her into the prison system, only for the doors to be open for her to be let back out. Like, that doesn't make any sense, does it?
Well, it does and it doesn't, I suppose, in that there has to be a deterrent to people who've committed compo claim fraud. So we've had a situation in this country, if you take, for example, I'm not speaking directly about the Lawrences, but if you look at sort of car fraud, or car compo claim fraud, like, it was widespread in this country. I mean, people were putting in bills, they were getting a huge amounts of money without necessarily having to prove particular injuries. It was a gravy train for lawyers, although they always seem to come on and dispute that for some reason, the legal organisations. But they were siphoning off a huge amount of the actual money between the two legal teams, the defendants.
It's known as ambulance chasing.
Well, I suppose it was. And all of that pushed us up to have some of the highest premiums in Europe, which are continually stay up there. So as part of all of that, if you want to attack that culture, you have to bring, there has to be risk for people who engage in it. Now, people felt that they could bring these claims, even if they lost them, they simply just wouldn't pay the money. They wouldn't pay the costs. So there has to be a further legal risk. Obviously, the Lawrences were identified in that. The charges of deception are about dishonestly making a gain. So it's not just doing the wrong paperwork, but it's doing it with the intention of basically committing fraud. So you can't. Society has to deal with that and show that if you do this, there is a risk that you're taking. Obviously, in terms
society's not providing the accommodation in prison to go down the road of jailing people like Winnie Lawrence. If you're there's a rotating door there. She's gone in and she's back out. So what do you do with that? And realistically, what is prison going to do for that, for Winnie Lawrence. I don't know what the answer is.
No, I mean, there might not be a simple answer like
and there
this.
probably isn't a kind of a financial hit she can take. I imagine she's probably on state benefits.
Sure, I'm sure.
She's on her pension now, of course.
Yeah, I mean, if you look back on the amounts of money, like it wasn't, life change. I mean, look, it's
10,000 for a slip and a fall in Tesco, 8,000 for a slip and fall in a book value bookstore, 5,000 for burning herself on a heater on a Dublin bus vehicle. And we're also saying that she other bogus claims that weren't successful was a claim against CIE for tripping while getting off a bus, and other claims for trips and falls in Lucan and Leakslip.
So, I mean, and if you look at obviously then her family as well, who've also been involved, they had, I think Patrick had 4 false claims under 2 names. Eileen had 5 claims under 2 names, and the sons had lesser. Tom had 1 claim, and John had 4 claims. So altogether, it adds up to a huge amount of money. But it's obviously...
And they're only the ones that were identified as part of the investigation. So we don't know what's gone on before that. And, there was this culture and this sort of, criminal enterprise being described. So clearly there had been other claims made successfully that weren't part of this investigation. So where's that money? And is that money something that could be, could assets be identified? There were some cars taken, I think, from them at the time, from memory, was there?
Well, I mean, there were certainly raids and there was vehicles seized, whether they were finally taken or not. But I suppose, I mean, what is the purpose of prosecuting people criminally? I mean, there has to be a consequence for criminal actions in any country. If you look at places, well, I mean, you can have no consequences for criminal actions. There will be an effect on society. It's just as simple as that. Obviously, locking people up doesn't necessarily deter crimes occurring, but there has to be a balance to be struck. We've seen there are other schemes that people can be dealt with through the criminal justice system, and I imagine probation and suspended sentences clearly play a role in that. There can be financial consequences, fines, and all of these things. But really, if you look at criminal justice throughout the world, I mean, we had huge controversy, of course, in America, where we had defund the police in the US, where there was a widespread movement. The belief that, people shouldn't be prosecuted effectively for criminal actions, and that money spent policing them should go into different schemes like dealing with addiction. Now, some of the success of the Republican Party in the last elections have been put down to that previous, movement that existed within the Democratic Party. So really, I suppose if you look at it all, there has to be a carrot and a stick, probably. There also does have to be.
But there has to be the prison spaces if you're going to deal with it through the criminal justice system and through the process of convicting somebody and giving them a jail term. You then have to provide the space for that. I mean, look.
And you can't just lump them into prisons like you see. No. I mean, we've all seen the pictures in El Salvador and these places where.
No, we need to be humane as well. Yeah. But the likes of Winnie Lawrence isn't going to come out of jail and probably do any damage to another human being or anything like that.
Certainly not.
But what you have is a constant narrative in this country that there's overcrowding and that they're letting out prisoners. In the UK, the problem has got so bad that they're letting out, convicted, dangerous gangland criminals.
Yeah.
In a revolving door system. I mean, including our own, was Liam Byrne in and out very quickly?
I think he did.
He was released early, I think, on the basis that the prisons are completely overcrowded. And they're released onto licence within the community. Now, people involved in organised crime are probably more of a detriment to society, or a bigger detriment to society, and a danger as well, because they can often be involved in, murders and all the rest of it. So where do you draw the line with it? And where do you say, we urgently need extra spaces in prison and we need to not lock down this culture before it starts of letting people out because there's no space?
Well, I think exactly. I mean, it's the state has to decide what its priorities are. Now, the state has not done a good job at communicating the fact that we can't afford everything, I suppose. If you look at the Children's Hospital, look how long that's taken to be built. Look how much it's run over budget. Do you say, for example, well, we're not building this children's hospital so we can build more prison spaces? I mean, how would people feel about that? Other people will feel, well, if you we also fought against having to take money off Apple at some point as well.
Yeah.
So there's lots of, we don't want that. We want that 10 billion or whatever it was.
What are we going to do with it?
Yeah, well, I think we've already spent it probably. But
10 times over probably.
Yeah, but what I mean is, look, these aren't simple issues. And, they're not simple issues, and people, of course, simplify them. But there's all sorts of pressures come, and you see it all the time. The pressures coming on politicians to basically ensure stronger prison sentences. For example, knife crime. There was new laws brought in to double the consequence for knife crime. Nobody would say you shouldn't be putting people away for knife crime, but there is a disconnect because you're doubling the sentence for things like that, or we talked last week about bringing in new laws around stalking. All of these things. Revenge porn was another one in recent times. There's a big movement about domestic violence laws.
Did we talk last week about stalking? That's really bad if I don't remember.
Well,
that.
I think we did.
Me and you.
Well,
oh my
in fact,
God,
we did. Yes,
in
fact, we did.
That's
no, well,
that's
look,
bad.
I mean, you don't.
I think I need to go for assessment.
You generally don't listen to me anyway.
Well, considering the stalking was around my own personal.
It was.
Yeah, that's bad that I don't remember that.
Yeah,
I do now. Of course, it's clear, crystal clear.
Crystal clear. So all of these pressures come to bring further sentences to take a stand against these crimes, which is all totally valid, I have to say. But if you can't deal with it at the other end, where you don't have anywhere to put them, it doesn't make sense. But a lot of things that happen in this country and other countries don't make a lot of sense.
Indeed. And often you and I don't make a lot of sense.
No,
so there we go. Okay, let's leave it at that.
Certainly, you can speak for yourself there. Robbie Lawler was out of control.
This is Double Cross, the murder of Robbie Lawler.
It was going to be an all-out war with him in the middle of it.
Crime World special investigation podcast based on my new book, Web of Betrayal, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Nicola Tallant and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.